While this is listed as a review for Tales of Arise, this is actually more of a review for the whole franchise, so please stick around and possibly learn something new from a die-hard fan. Now, I'm an honest reviewer first and a die-hard fan second, though I may make some claims that you may have strong feelings against, such as a character that you particularly enjoy or a game in the series that is your all-time favorite. Please note that I am in no way trying to target you directly or to start an argument with you, nor do I believe that your opinion is worse than mine. It's just how I feel about something that I am equally passionate about with this franchise, and honestly, I welcome your own experience. The Tales of series is a long-running series developed by Bandai Namco. These games are a particularly unique type of JRPG, and I wouldn't say they are excessively concentrated on any one particular aspect. These games deal with a lot of character growth, bonding, charm, and overall decent repetitive flashy gameplay and story depending on the actual title itself. Over the years, many titles have been launched in the background and simply forgotten over time, along with the excitement and joy that was had with them, due to a lack of willingness from the Western consumers to keep up with the Tales series beyond Japan. This is why you probably are not familiar with these openings. There are so many titles that I believe that have been lost to time, like Tales of Link, Tales of Krystoria, and Tales of Rise, to name a few, which are all gacha games that most people would dismiss immediately as unimportant, but to us fans, they really did mean everything, allowing us to get to see everybody in the series together to help further develop their bonds. Tales of Krystoria and Tales of Rise were both gacha games that operated for quite some time before eventually shutting down due to poor management outside of Japan, with Tales of Rise going offline in July of 2024. The Western release didn't even last for more than a year. None of their gachas do, unfortunately. I would say it's because half the Western players probably have no idea who the hell they're actually trying to roll for, since they haven't even played any of them in the previous games. Despite their departure, these were some truly wonderful times spent appreciating a franchise that I grew up with and continue to support to this day. It's just unfortunate that you can't also, because it no longer exists. I would also like to mention the Trials of series, even though it's not a game series that is associated in any way with Bandai. This series is mainly a very detailed political, national conflict, and secret organizations involving numerous handfuls of main playable characters in both the main and side games from various nations, with literally up to 2 to 3 and even up to 5 hours of back-to-back narrative before you ever get a chance to actually play the game combat-wise and all of that other good stuff. There are many other JRPGs that offer something more, be it a decent blend of both combat, character bonding, or narrative, like with the Persona series. But no other developer has ever come close to the Tales of series format in my opinion that oozes a lot of that charm and developer trial and error for new features with new games and spin-off titles. It's been 3 years and I've purposely avoided playing Tales of Arise until today when I found it on sale for $10. Tales of Arise will never be considered canon to me in the context of the series. That isn't to say that I genuinely think that it doesn't deserve the praise that it gets, because it does have a lot of good stuff going for itself when it isn't parading around as a Tales of title. Even though they are all standalone games with their own references, characters, and cameos, this is one massive departure from the game's normal formula and elements. Now, before you start your argument and state that the game was absolutely peak, and while that may be true for you, that is your opinion, and this would be mine. While our opinions are different, they are still both valid to us and anybody else that agrees with it. I would just like you to think carefully about what your argument includes first, and to potentially listen and watch to see why I have this viewpoint, and to help you with visually understanding what I mean. Full disclosure, I've played every Tales of title I can get my hands on, both physically and virtually. This contains all spin-off titles on the handhelds, mobile, and of course the core titles in the series, and even the Japanese-only clients. Suffice it to say, I have a very decent notion of how they've handled their formula over the years. I don't buy into items or place any monetary value on action figures and such, so you were not going to see me with a full room of overly crazed fangirl obsessions like posters in the works, but if I did, Tales would be the only series that I would ever be interested in. I don't want to really spoil any of the other games for you, but I just have to mention a few because you're seriously missing out if you haven't played any of them outside of the recent releases or remasters, especially with the upcoming Graces F remaster. Speaking of this remaster, it's just such a surprise that on the very same week of playing the game and preparing this review, I got word of a remake for Trials in the Sky Chapter 1, a fan translation patch for Rebirth, and soon a patch for Destiny 2. So if there was any better time to check out the originals, now is that time because you do not want to miss it. Also, please do not be fooled by Destiny 2. It is not Eternia. Destiny 2 is the true sequel to the first Destiny, which was never released to Western audiences. We'll be making a lot of references to the past titles to emphasize the concept that I'm attempting to convey. Bandai Namco is an experimental developer. This means that they are still one of the very few developers who are willing to take a risk at a fresh formula every time that differs from their prior games, whereas a developer like Ubisoft reused and reuses the same formula for so many years, re-releasing the same game until they eventually said, hey, let's change the formula, which made a lot of people unhappy, especially with Odyssey and Valhalla. Moving on back onto Tales, every game in this series cannot be described as the same, because they frequently remove or introduce new components that make or ruin the experience, as seen with Tales of Zesteria's horrible elemental combat, which made the gameplay physically degrade by leaps and bounds, with also a boring cast of characters outside of Edna and her brother and, of course, Zavid. Regardless of how aspects were changed, a few essential features remain constant in each game up until now with Arise, which we will discuss as issues later. One thing that irritates me, particularly in any video gaming community, is when a large percentage of players are just so eager to jump on a bandwagon and give more praise or hate towards something because of a visual style and flair brought up by an amazing animation studio like Ufotable. Just look at that visual style for Demon Slayer. It's on a completely different level of choreography and depth. This would make anybody pick up a JRPG for the very first time if they saw it in a trailer or in the game itself, which was the case with Berseria and Arise and of course Zesteria. Whereas if you were to showcase something from the past, like Tales of the Abyss, it just doesn't feel or seem all that interesting from somebody in this day and age, where they really need that visual eye candy to actually grab their attention. This is what a lot of people use to completely overlook every other element that game does and does not have to offer, be that gameplay, story, character bonding, and more, because this is their entry level to a series they know nothing about, and it doesn't set a good example if you start with Arise. Not to say it's a terrible game, it's just not a Tales game. You would be better off starting with Berseria or really, in all honesty, any of the previous games from the PlayStation X and onwards, and even then, some of those games have their problems. But it's generally things that you can easily overlook, like with Tales of Symphonia and the in-game issue with being stuck on the Silverant content, having to fight off very high-level monsters because you didn't get on the ship to Palmacosta early on that disappears if you cross this bridge right around a corner. More specifically, if you headed further in and progressed to any of the main story around Hema, which would always lock you into this content. It then only opens back up once you've cleared this section, which takes forever, and then when you do get to Palmacosta, you're just insanely strong and everything is just getting melted in front of you. As previously stated, each game is standalone, thus you can play any game in whatever order without losing out on anything save for some cameo references, outfit throwbacks, or music throwbacks with select games and their additional features. As a result, they do frequently differ in gameplay, story, features, and of course, the major cast of characters. A few take place in the same universe, and you may occasionally meet with the previous cast, but they all include the trademark fundamental aspects that indicate you're playing a Tales game. This could be the Cat's Corner, the skits, mystic arts, or the cameos, and a handful of other things like battle quotes and quips.
Gaius, are you a masochist?
Where did you learn that word?
Oh, Alvin told me it. He says you really love being attacked.
Oh, really? We will see about that then.
Okay.
Whoa, chill out, guys.
To hidden characters and story arcs that help you bond with them more personally and individually, while also granting you titles to commemorate your achievements and sometimes offering bonus effects and also outfits. Tales of Symphonia, for example, once again is possibly the most well-known and played game in the entire series, second only to Vesperia. This is why people say it's the best, not because it is, but because it's usually their first entry into the series, similar to what people say with Arise or even Berseria and Zesteria. I personally spent over 1,000 hours playing it on the GameCube, even though it only takes 50 to 60 hours to beat it once and about 120 hours to 100%, there is just so much replayability with these games. It was one of the few games that I bought for that device and replayed several times. It was also the first game in the series that I played that introduced me to the series, and even though I may think it was great, going back and playing it again after playing every other title and putting nostalgia aside, it just really wasn't that great. It was full of tropes, annoying characters, specifically Colette, but it did have a decent story and somewhat decent gameplay. Moving on to the sequel, Emile Castagnier and Martha Lualdi were introduced with a multiple choice ending story element with creature collection instead of a party of heroes in the same universe. It wasn't a great sequel, but they attempted something new being creature collection and they never did that kind of feature again, but they did bring back the multiple choice endings with Exilia 2. This is how they do things, through trial and error to see what works the most. Tales of Destiny and Tales of Destiny 2, on the other hand, approached the subject of sequels much more personally and on a deeper character level, utilizing a hero's legacy and future, specifically with family and time travel, to accomplish what they themselves could not due to strife and betrayal. This is literally some of the most top-tier writing and gameplay that needs to be experienced by anybody trying to get into JRPGs or somebody who is looking for an unforgettable classic JRPG experience. You can also slide down the playground slide. They really do go all out here with a lot of things like minigames, trivia quizzes, and everything you would expect to see in old school JRPGs that try to entertain you. It can be a hit or a miss, usually it is in that specific order, over and over again. To sell home that idea, let's look back at their previous titles when they were taken over by the new studio. The first Tales of Exilia was simply terrible, to the point where I was actively becoming enraged at the cast of characters other than Alvin and Gaius. Everything just felt very rushed and made absolutely no sense on my first playthrough. I was actively thinking to myself, Mila and Jude are just so obnoxious and uninteresting, and I had a very strong urge to want to physically punch them. Now remember what we said prior. Bandai Namco is an experimental developer. Tales of Exilia 2 is better because it adopted the Dawn of the New World multiple choice endings that let you kill everybody in the previous game down the genocide route. You cannot tell me this was not intentional. It literally felt like the developers were actually listening to us, the player base, similarly to how Zestiria got that free patch for Alicia's side story, because of the controversy about how fans of her were upset that she wasn't given enough screen time, and how they really didn't like Rose coming out of nowhere with her character. The only thing wrong with Exilia 2 is that if not for the depth mechanic, it would have been a great game. The game had a feature that really pushed players to the breaking point with an in-game padded depth feature that prevented you from going to new locations and progressing the main story until you farmed enough gal to pay it off. It really wasn't that bad because it did incentivize you to explore and to find more better ways to make gal efficiently, but still, it was something that a lot of us considered to be extremely tedious to deal with. Tales of Zestiria was the worst degrade in combat and story. It was a little bit better than Exilia, but still overly trash outside of Edna and maybe Zavid, who are more than capable of carrying because of their story and personalities. Tales of Berseria nailed it home once again by being great, even though they did some censorship and they did mess up the skits a whole bunch. It was like Fantasia's character personalities mixed with Grace's F, but with a refined combat and a darker story of Exilia 2. So, do you see how things have gone out over the last few releases? This leads me to believe the format would continue because this is how they have been for some time. Tales of Arise would ultimately be a bad game because their previous title was a hit. Tales of Arise could have been named anything else and it would have worked on its own. I would say think of it like this. Imagine if they took a game like Code Vein, their Dark Souls version of God Eater, and named it Tales of Vein. It wouldn't make sense because it isn't a Tales game in any format. This leads me to conclude that their current experimental choice for Tales of Arise was to explore how far they could get away from their core ideas by slapping the Tale label over a different game that uses very few aspects from their established formula. It feels very corporate and lacking any charm, like the developers were pressed to make a specific game tailored for a specific subgroup of gamers, not long-standing fans of the series. We're going to be going over every issue that we've discovered with this game, including the performance and gameplay aspects that you would expect to see but don't since they've been removed from the game entirely. Upon first loading up the game, nothing seems out of place. However, if you have multiple monitors and your taskbar is on one of the side screens, the game will launch on the screen with the taskbar after you initially close the game once. This is a common issue that I observe and notice among indie developers. There's an easy workaround to fix it. All you have to do is to move your taskbar to the main screen, load up the game once, and then put the taskbar back. It is a little inconvenient, and nowhere as severe as the previous optimization issues that this game had upon release, but it is still a problem. When the game was originally released, it was a very bad port, as it had very little support for a lot of the features like frame rate and controllers. Bandai Namco is known for having reoccurring issues with the general porting of titles to PC. While this has been remedied in the recent years, I'd like to point out that they also continuously shoved DLCs down your throat whenever you sat at the campfire to rest. This is what first discouraged me from even playing it on release day. Now you might think that it's not that big of a deal, but a lot of these features in these DLCs are features that you used to get in the game for free by taking on challenging content, completing hidden side stories, and getting rewarded for doing so. It would give you a lot more incentive to continue playing after you beat the game, and to play multiple times afterwards to enjoy it on higher difficulties. This really was a good demonstration of where their primary focus was here with Tales of Arise, stripping away everything that makes a Tales game a Tales game. By adding in DLC and microtransactions, while completely optional, it was extremely forced for the first time in the entire series, worse than ever before. While the pop-ups are no longer present, it was there originally, and it still kinda is with the DLC menu. The Tales of series is always full of dungeons, X-dungeons, puzzles, hidden locations, and more. One of the reoccurring features is that of the Sorcerer's Ring, which is utilized to solve numerous puzzles. Even though they are quite basic and unimpressive, it's a major disappointment to see that Tales of Arise has no puzzles or dungeons like this. Tales of Arise uses the power of friendship to solve all of their linear problems in the most visually obtrusive manner, such as requiring you to utilize combination attacks to complete every elite or boss fight, and to clear a route to a chest somewhere in the area. One thing that surprised me and a friend of mine was the lack of couch co-op or multiplayer options. It really might not seem like a big deal, but consider the fact that most titles before Zestiria, Berseria, and Arise offered some form of co-op for you to play together. While the main player controlled the actual game and the world exploration, I feel like it's a huge step away from those who enjoyed playing these games together. It is a tiny inconvenience, but it's still disappointing to see it continue to be a feature they appear to want to push in the future titles. If you enjoy fighting foes or despise encountering them on a regular basis, every other title had a solution for you. Holy and Dark Bottles. One would prevent creatures from fighting you or spawning frequently to simply avoiding you entirely, while the other would draw them closer to you, allowing you to grind quicker if you wanted to. They seem to remove this feature. However, it appears that you can simply run away from a large majority of elite battles, and sometimes you can't, which appears to be a significant oversight. You'll understand what I mean later, because as you come closer and closer to the finale, you'll grow tired of fighting. Tales of Arise does not do the skits or character bonding scenes any justice whatsoever. While prior titles had occasionally veered towards a more PNG avatar style, Zestiria, Berseria, and Arise have all been equally bad, and I would say that they've been deteriorating far faster than I had ever anticipated. This is where we'll make another reference to the Trials of series, to reinforce the idea that developers become much more lazy over time. Looking back on both Trials and Tales games, you'll see just how much emotion, animation, and charm went into not only their main aspects, but also their story, their cutscene, and voice acting, if they had any, which usually isn't the case with a large portion of the Trials series. Now we're going to showcase one game and then their most current titles, and you can notice a significant decline across the board, with stiff avatars and very little work put into anything other than the story or nothing else at all. Once again, the Trials in the Sky and Trials of Cold Steel series made by Nihon Falcom is completely irrelevant to the Tales of series. It's just being used as a reference to what I'm trying to express to you.
Hey there, you two. We, didn't mean to interrupt.
How long have you been there?
Mentioning once again briefly, it was literally just announced that they will be remaking the Trials in the Sky Chapter 1, and just look at this quick peek of charm and emotion put into it. I know that I may sound like I'm exaggerating it, but when you're spending over $100 or more for a game, depending on your country, and it appears like the animators were restricted in what they were physically allowed to or capable of accomplishing, it just feels lazy. Like, I'm not expecting something overly animated like Hoyoverse and their Zenless Zone Zero game, but I'd really like to see some emotion put into some of these plastic-looking 3D models that don't move a muscle for minutes straight. Next up would be the Tales of references.
ルーティー、ここにいたのか。チェルシーに悪いことしちゃった。ああ、イライラする。ねえスタン、もっと嫌になること言ってあげようか。思わない。どうしてよ。ルーティー、無理しなくていいから。無理ですって。やめてよ、変な登場するの。冗談じゃないわ。
Why are you staring at me?
I could ask the same thing.
So this is how the Sovereign and Maiden are supposed to look. You two go great together.
Law, come stand between us.
Oh, sure. You want me to put something white on as well?
Of course she doesn't.
Mind if I join you, Law?
Night.
Notice how it's the same A-posing 3D models with the same reused animations that, at least for Arise, discourages you from really trying to draw closer to any of the characters. I'd want to note that I like farming in Tales games since, in previous games, you'd gain not only Gald and EXP, but also things like Grade as you improved, particularly with your combo effects and streaks. So seeing Arise completely remove things like the Cat's Corner was like a punch in the gut. Monsters no longer drop Gald, so you must either partake in fishing minigames, which is fun for like 5 minutes for Gald, or sell all of your materials such as the ore or crafting supplies, or specifically farm monsters with a specific item that sells for a very high price to shopkeepers. When combined with the reality that you're ultimately going to lose interest in fighting monsters, fishing and giving up all of your crafting supplies, you will only have a few options left. Running auto mode and doing something else while you wait in very easy mode where you will stay, but also you still see yourself hitting things with massive HP bars. This is a terrible waste of time because of gels, as well as equipment and crafting supplies are incredibly expensive. I used cheats to simply modify my Gald so that I could sit down and play the game without being forced to grind, since playing normally, just like every other game, and not grinding all of the time was not giving me any possible way to afford the items on default difficulty, which surprised me, because I have always played each game completely without the need or desire to do something like this unless playing on unknown difficulty. That being to grind monsters, not to use cheats. There is simply no justification for removing Gald as a drop. It makes no sense and only leads to forcing you to have to grind more like with Exilia 2, but for a completely dumb and unreasonable reason. Eventually you just want to stop fighting because everything is a waste of time. You don't even need to battle half of the monsters, simply run away and they vanish, including elites. Previous games would not let you do this. They would not let you run or bypass elites. You would have to face them. None of the characters are remotely enjoyable, and there are no scenes or battle clips that help you bond with them like in previous games. So they just kind of expect you to give a shit about them without giving you much exposure to them, and they're overly obsessant whining and crying with the typical generic English screaming protagonist voices. I mean, yeah, I'm being overly harsh, and that's not to say that it wasn't an interesting story, it simply felt like one of those over-the-top television dramas that doesn't really showcase genuine connection because you only met that person an hour ago. So you're not given enough exposure to truly connect with the characters in this game, like Law, Rinwell, and Kasara. We get it. Law has daddy issues and now his dad is gone. Rinwell also lost her family, so that means the dynamic that they try to push for them both is validated because they have something like this in common? It just seems forced, too quick, and a bad choice for bonding. Arise is the only game in the series that has removed the battle quotes. This was integral to the series in helping you bond and understand characters much more deeply, as well as their bonding with each other, to the point where you could actually grow closer to them later on when something devastating happens or they begin to show love interest in one another. It's a direct downgrade because it no longer exists. I'm not sure about you, but I really do miss the days when you could receive a pop-up voice narrative that was well thought out and timed so that even if you were in combat or running at full speed, you'd get to the place or sequence before that dialogue ended. Arise has a lot of moments where you're walking, running, and listening, and then it cuts off by another cutscene or a skit, which reinforces the point that you never have any remote interest in any of the characters, unless you are willing to stand there and wait for the dialogue to end before attempting to move forward, to get a read on each of them. Unlike previous games, you do not acquire access to extra skill slots until 15 hours into the game, and there are only 3 ground and 3 aerial skills available early on, not counting the combo effects and character arts. While it does shift to 6 ground and 6 aerial later on, which is more than the 8 offered in most prior titles, and provide a little more variety, it still seems quite limited for the duration of the early game. Even though you have full customization of your arts and combat, it's more of a pet peeve that you can't use these extra skill slots until later. While references are cool, like really cool, they will only be understood by longtime fans who have heard the Indignation incantation as a mystic art.
He's casting indignation!
Stay away from my
Insignificant worm!
As well as cameos and costume references, or even the music. Tales of Arise sees you running around looking for artifacts, which are found in side quests, inside of chests, and in certain encounters. I could never really enjoy this. I refused to explore halfway through. Finally, we can discuss the charm of the skits. So sit back, relax, and watch a few of these skits from Tales of Phantasia, Tales of Destiny 2, Vesperia, and Exilia 2 before comparing them to how they appear in Arise. Continuing our earlier talk about how developers tend to lower their quality over time by doing less instead of more, or at the very least a bare minimum to keep their original format close at hand.
みんなで旅するのって楽しいね。
何を能天気な。 遊びに行くんじゃないんだぞ。いいじゃないですか。ずっと張り詰めててもよくないし。
私もそう思います。ほら、若い人同士だと意見もぴったりだよね。ってことで、課題ことはいい子なしじゃん。
わかったよ、まったく。魔術師でなければとっとと追い返してるぞ。
せっかく雪国に来たんだから雪合戦しようよ。
そりゃいい考えだな。
これあっくしょう、後ろからなんて卑怯だぞ。それ
ひっどいカイル。
あ、ごめん、今のはロニが避けたからってうわ
お返しですよーだ。
くそー、負けてたまるか。
僕はやらないぞ。そういうガキ臭い遊びはとっくの昔に卒業した聞こえてなかったみたいだな。僕は誰だ。今石を入れてたやつは。
ああ、ジューダスが剣を抜いた。逃げろ。
貴様らそこに直れ。
Yuri's croquettes are the best!
How strange. They're just balls of mashed potatoes, but there must be a secret ingredient.
Oh yeah? What'd you put in it, Yuri?
Love.
Who are you? What'd you do with Yuri?
My hearing isn't what it used to be. What'd you say the secret ingredient was?
Love. The lady who ran the inn where I lived always said cooking was all about love. I put as much love in them as I could, so eat them with care, okay?
Yuri's love-filled croquettes.
Ugh.
I wish they weren't so good.
So, are you Rolo's owner, or is it Glasses Guy here? I knew it. He seems to like Luger best.
That's not true. He only hovers around Luger like that because he's the one who makes his food.
What?
Rolo is smart enough to understand that his true owner is the one who pays for that food. But of course, the devotion he feels towards me runs far deeper than his food bowl. Isn't that right, Rolo?
Give it to me straight, Rolo. Who do you like best? He says he likes me best.
What?
Rolo, how could you?
Do you think Faria was really being controlled by someone?
Certainly seemed that way. The question is who? The Red Woman?
The same person who's behind all of this, I'll bet. Whoever that is.
Brainwashed or otherwise, the feelings of resentment she holds towards me are real.
Someone used her because they knew we'd hold back. If that's not playing dirty, I don't know what is.
It does tell us one thing at least. Someone here in Lenegis is watching us. Someone who means us harm.
There's no question. That attack was meant for us alone.
By someone capable of getting inside a person and manipulating them like a weapon. We need to find whoever it is, fast.
It really doesn't have to be the PNG sprites or the icons, just a little bit of charm in animating each character's emotions and sensations, rather than being stiff and dull. If you paid attention, you'll notice that Law and everybody else have specific animations throughout the entire game that they repeatedly cycle over in many of their skits and sequences, such as Law scratching his chest and holding the back of his neck, while he and everybody is just forcibly standing there in their 3D model staring off into the distance, especially during campfire scenes with their mouths moving out of sync to the conversations, but not a whole lot of body language to convey what they're actually feeling. Regardless of how many people enjoy the manga-style skits, they do fail once you've had a taste of proper emotional character bonding through these skits with prior games. Instead of taking a random biome and then placing each character's 3D model stationary in the foreground and then doing these unnecessarily annoying transitions, they could have simply kept it the way that they did with Cesteria and Berseria instead of experimenting. It's just too much of a directional shift. One last issue. You don't appear to be able to get risky or favorable encounters if you run into enemies from behind, and vice versa. It was very disappointing that such a simple element had been removed, because I found myself going for them even though they weren't in there. Almost every Tales game has portrayed their story in a unique way through their opening intro, so if you have not played Arise, please go ahead and revisit the intro. Determine what the story is expressing. The same thing goes if you haven't played it. Really try to glean what minor details it gives to you to tell a story through it. If you've played the full game, you can see a few points and references because you know exactly what's happening. But if you didn't, all it tells you is that a pink-haired girl and a white-haired man did something bad. Now they fight. They also have the ability of pulling a sword out of the girl's chest. Now do the same with a game like Tales of Cristoria and tell me you cannot comprehend what I'm trying to say. Really try to understand the baseline story on what is happening in the intro and you'll fully understand what I'm trying to help you understand. Tales of Krystoria, which is no longer available anymore because it was unfortunately shut down, starts off with two of the main characters running away from something. They stop and ponder upon this specific emblem, which is shown to be what labels them as part of a society. They both seem to have done something terrible, kill somebody either by accident or on purpose, and this emblem that bound him to society shatters and brands them as a traitor of sorts, and then they are chased by the things that enforces the rules of the society. They eventually run into one another and also into a man who has been also branded, but instead of running, he helps them fight, and they seem to gain power and unleash their will to fight back against this oppressive society. Then if you are a fan of the whole series, you would then see the showcasing of a lot of the main characters from previous games, which would indicate that it's a spin-off title, which it was. I just wish that Arise was the spin-off title because Krystoria really didn't get the treatment that it deserved. It deserved to be its own title, not to be lost as a spin-off. Tales of Arise is simply a showcasing of how great Ufotable is at creating things like high-quality visual graphics with animation, and the same thing could be said with Bandai Namco and their graphical style. But the story writing is comparable to Tales of Grace's F, which is sappy and bland, but Grace has succeeded due to its fluid combat and charming character skits. If you're unfamiliar with the story of Tales of Grace's F, it is all about the power of friendship and being kind to one another, even if you are a purely evil physical energy being like Lambda. It doesn't matter, come on, let's all be friends and stop fighting and go get something to eat. The core idea of the story in Tales of Arise is that of the generic amnesia trope, with the main protagonist eventually regaining his memories to selflessly do everything correctly to save the world, using the strength and love of friendship accumulated over the adventure to save themselves from the ever-present threat of a dark energy source that is trying to consume the universe. Arise is pretty poorly written as it feels rushed, with a lot of confusing diversions here and there. Consider the discussion between Dolahim and Kisara. Kisara's brother understands the truth about what is happening to the slaves in Eldimancia, so he does everything it takes to prove to the Lord to help open his eyes to the truth that he is unaware of. Essentially, up until this point, every Lord has been an asshole attempting to subject all of the Danan slaves into forced labor so that they can use the spirit cores that have been forced on them, which is kinda similar to the X-Spheres, Key Crests, and Crucis Crystals in a way from Tales of Symphonia, just without the side effect of mutating them into monsters if they try to remove them. Eventually, once their spirit cores are complete, the energy is siphoned into the astral cores for the crown selection to transmute that energy back to their home planet of Rena. You enter with your group and take them out one by one until you meet Lord Dolahim. He wanted slaves to be treated the same way as Rena's people, out of compassion and love, with payment, lodging, food, and comfort, rather than being abused to death. When he realizes that his advisor has been secretly feeding the slaves a special fruit that causes them to produce more astral energy, which has a side effect of turning him into astral goo, he has a mental breakdown as he watches Kisara's brother melt before him. This brings back memories of his past, when he killed a buddy as a part of a forced competition that he did not want to participate in. But he does so against his will, and then it made him want to be a good lord and to help the slaves, so he did what he did to atone for killing his friend. Kisara, after watching her own brother die, refers to Dolahim as a selfish person, and Dolahim considers himself unselfish, which makes no sense because she is implying that he is a selfish, unaltruistic person for saving the slaves but not truly saving the slaves. Even if his altruistic intentions were good, he is still evil because the slaves died in the end, and so did her brother, who she didn't even have any contact with. It just doesn't make any sense, and even when they do eventually get back on track, it's just, what exactly were they trying to accomplish here? The writing here is all over the place. It starts off as a pretty decent story, and then takes a huge dive off of a cliff, tries to recover, and just continues to deteriorate because the game itself is just too short with a severe lack of side quests and character bonding moments for you to really be able to care about anything. Take Tales of Grace's F for example. Even though the story was very sappy, which was still okay, and not all that interesting, the actual characters, especially Pascal, were some of the most engaging moments that really helped you outside of the amazing combat, to help you bond with everyone. Not like with Systeria, where the only character that seemed to really do much was Edna, because she had the personality that she really didn't want to be here with any of them, which really resonated well with me. It's strange to say, but a lot of folks say that this is the best JRPG that they have ever played, and then you ask them the age-old question. What's the last JRPG you've ever played? And then they say something ridiculous like Final Fantasy XIII or compare this to Systeria, and also add in an extra fact that Systeria is also one of their favorite titles in the series, which they haven't even scratched the surface of, since this only refers to Bandai Namco Studios Incorporated. If they have played any of the prior titles, it would be a completely different response, assuming that they had any common sense or taste in decent storytelling and gameplay. This would explain why Symphonia, Vesperia, and Berseria, or Arise are widely regarded as outstanding, because these games are oftentimes the first game in the series most people become acquainted with, which then makes that their reference point. Combo arts and mystic arts, while entertaining and always fun to play around with no matter the title, become excessively boring here in Arise after every single fight with an elite or a boss, which are really just overly tuned sponges on every difficulty, where you can't do anything against bosses at 50% HP without first using your combo arts, and if you don't, they force it on you after you try to ignore it, and when you're about to kill them. It just makes combat take a little bit longer and forces more flashy gameplay down your throat, when all you want to do is to get the fight over with since it literally offers you nothing. No bonding scenes, no quips, no charm, especially if you're just farming and you don't want to watch another 5 to 6 second art cutscene instead of just killing it and moving on. Again, Arise looks good due to the unique cutscenes created by Ufotable, and the same could be said about the game's general presentation. It's visually stunning, but it's also just tacky in portraying relationships and bonding scenes that help you feel for these characters on the screen, which is what they're pushing with all of these out-of-nowhere love interests. So let's throw together Law and Rinwell because again they lost their families, but not actually do anything with it. While Shione and Alphen are out here with their sexual tension because Shione cannot touch others due to her curse. So she's an absolute ass to Alphen for the entire game until the end where they can finally smash their mouths together in the most unappealing relationship scene in the series. There's just too much TLC drama. Even switching the voice pack to Japanese didn't really help at all, especially during the original release where the translation was appalling due to grammatical errors everywhere, even though generally they have better expressions and can help bring more emotion to the events. Sometimes English can be great. This time around, it really wasn't for Arise, though it definitely was a lot better than a game like Eternia, which was like fingernails on a chalkboard.
You're joking.
Damn.
You'll destroy your soul and become like Giselle.
I know, but I don't mind.
This time around, it looked like they tried to experiment with the removal of several key aspects that brought together every single Tales game up until now with their art styles, charming skits, references, minigames, and more that made every experience much more enjoyable, making it feel nothing like a Tales game. The gameplay is likely one of the more decent components of the experience, however, I would say that I had more pleasure playing the fishing minigame than anything else, and even that wasn't that fantastic. The combat is limited and repetitive, which is not a bad thing. Difficulty simply raises and lowers the HP bar a lot, and also how much damage you take, not making things difficult in a challenging way. And of course, the expensive gels and lack of gald make it a very big chore to even bother challenging any of the higher difficulties until you've run around and collected every single artifact and started a new game plus, with all of these bonus effects unlocked. I usually don't mind the repetitive nature of these games, they are usually a lot of fun to play. But after only 10 hours, I got fed up. I used cheats to gain the geld and simply bought out all of the gels and upgrades that I had at the time to end the headache experience of not being able to do anything on the default difficulty without farming, since healing is bound to the new CP system, which is not like mana or TP or any of the other names that they've chosen for other games, making gels more useful. Arise was exhausting both psychologically and physically. It's as if they didn't know how to properly build the story or balance the gameplay with specialized arts. I mean, I used Luna Rondo the whole time because it was a cheap skill with the ability to avoid damage, and was simply faster than most skills, allowing you to spam it indefinitely with the right team and unlocks. Which does contribute to how I consider the gameplay to be mindless and dull. There was little reason to switch up your combos because you received nothing out of it except reduced damage and lengthier build-ups to be fancy and to potentially unlock a new skill. It's nice to unlock more skills after spamming the same skill 100, 500, 2000, or 3000 times until you hit the requirement to unlock a new enhanced art, which is very common in the previous titles, but there is just not much else to it because you will pretty much be spamming the same skill that you like the most to stun lock and do the most amount of damage so you can get the hell out of each encounter and beat the game before you put the game down for good. Unless you need a specific element in which you'll usually just switch a character and cast a specific spell which is faster, less expensive, and deals more damage than any of the other fully improved spells. They do try to incentivize farming not only for the materials to sell gold, upgrades, and crafts, but also to gain SP to unlock more effects, arts, enhancements, and so on for your combat abilities, all of which I had no intention of finishing. If they unlocked, they did. If they didn't, oh well. I wasn't going to be focused on anything other than beating the game as quickly as possible as they threw cutscene after tiresome cutscene at me, as well as the incredibly long and painful backtracking that you couldn't just bypass with fast travel. As a reminder, in prior games, they would simply show you an interactive sequence with the characters together talking, and then they would take you out of dungeons or locations, or even summon a teleporter for a quality of life exit. This has been a much longer video review and rant than any other game that I've looked into, in part because I really wanted to review every single game in this series, but doing so would take hundreds and thousands of hours because each game, which is more than 30, takes roughly 40 to 60 hours to beat on average. This would be a very significant time investment to get every single minor detail obtained to showcase and to talk about. Please don't misunderstand. I love these games that I play, and when I critique them, I'm trying to help both developers and yourself find problems that you may face. I just want to see this series continue flourishing. It's partly because I have a lot to say, and you can tell that I'm passionate about this because it's a series that I really enjoy. Even if it's a hit or a miss most of the times, I will still play it and enjoy what I can. If you believe Tales of Arise to be an incredibly fantastic experience, great, I'm glad that you liked it, but please, you should open yourself up to the new experiences that the whole series has to offer to you. I've been a huge fan of the series since I first played Tales of Symphonia, which led me down a rabbit hole of experiences that had me crying with laughter, grief, and even anger. The level of devotion that I have for the series drove me to play a few emulated versions of the non-released Japanese version like Destiny 2 and Rebirth with the wonderfully talented and equally passionate translation efforts from Kirameki and Lainan, with an English script translation side by side until I finished those games, which was the most thrilling experience I have ever had in a series. I really don't tend to like reading for the most part, so this should speak volumes. It appears that none of the content in this game was anywhere near what was expected in comparison to previous titles, as if they asked some people who had never worked on a Tales game or knew anything about the prior games, while also being told what to do by some corpos who were attempting to push a specifically overly done romance Tales figure story. That isn't to say that I don't like romance in these games, it just wasn't done well here because it was just way too quick. Before we wrap up this video, I'd like to go over a few of the previous games that I would strongly advise that you pick up and play whenever you're ready to experience some of the best from the original Namco Tales studio with the establishment of Team Destiny from 2002 to 2010. This is why starting in 2011 we've seen a steady drop in quality as a result of the new team with clearly different goals. These are my personal opinions, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't play any of the previous or recent titles not mentioned here, including the spin-offs. It's just I highly doubt that you would want to spend over 1,000 or 2,000 hours trying to play them all, but these are some excellent choices if you're ever interested in picking up the series to see what they normally have to offer. Tales of Fantasia is the first entry in the series back on the original SNES. One thing that absolutely blew our minds as kids is that it had some decently bad voice lines, especially in combat. If you do end up getting this game, you should get the PlayStation 1 version, which offers the fully voiced skits with the whole cast. The story is amazing, despite the fact that it contains many old-school anime stereotypes. It will keep you captivated with the 2D turn-based real-time combat. The Tales of Fantasia Natakiri Dungeon series are my few favorite spin-off titles. They're so full of personality and charm, incorporating the world of Tales, which means there's a lot of secret bosses and appearances like dungeons. The fact that they are for the Game Boy, PlayStation Portable, and other handhelds does make it difficult to recommend them, but I did have a lot of fun with them all, and I really do think you would too if you gave them the chance after playing the first game. Tales of Destiny and Tales of Destiny 2 undoubtedly have some of the best narrative sequel writing. Sure, the original game had some flaws with the passport searching scenes, but that's the only drawback, and man, the devs went all out with the secrets in the second game, such as Barbados appearing from his castle to stomp your ass for farming while AFK in the overworld. And the fan translation of Destiny 2 is currently finished and being beta tested. Since the older titles don't tend to get remasters, I did originally play this game through with a written transcript as mentioned. You would be shocked by how immersed I was despite that hurdle. This is the best sequel in the entire series and offers a lot of references in future titles. Tales of the Abyss appeals to you on a character development level, with Luc von Fabre and how he matures over time. While the game itself has many flaws like a frame rate issue in the overworld and not a great display of gameplay overall, it still has one of the arguably better stories that many people think about because it really does emulate a lot of hate and forgiveness within you towards him. The OST is an absolute banger as well. With Tales of Vesperia, I spent over $400 on an Xbox and 2 copies of Vesperia to play it back in the day before it was released as a port to PC, and never once touched the Xbox ever again after it laser burned the disc completely when the console was nudged. Vesperia is a fantastically charming experience because of the chemistry every one of the characters have for one another. While it may not be the best combat in the series, you stay because it's genuinely fun, and eventually for that sweet farming gameplay and all of the extra goodies it has in store. Tales of Grace's F boasts the finest combat but some of the weakest story writing. The combat and a few of the characters, while awesome and silly, carry the experience throughout the main game and the optional second disc story arc. Since it is being remastered, I would recommend that you wait because, as previously noted, Bandai loves to screw up their PC ports, so if you do have a PlayStation 3 laying around, there is absolutely no shame in picking up the original. And finally, Tales of Berseria is practically the epitome of what defines a Tales game. Tales of Berseria takes place in the same universe as Zestiria, but many years prior, and drastically alters the gameplay format, which is why it's often recognized as one of the best recent releases. It has a great story, a lot of engaging combat, and a lot of character development with a gorgeous art style and detail. I particularly enjoy the different and sometimes familiar characteristics that some characters have, which can be compared to earlier titles as a form of nostalgia. On that final note, to sum up this entire rant and review for Tales of Arise, it's a good, decent game, but due to the fact that it's parading around with the Tales of title with absolutely no resemblance of being a Tales game, all it would have had to do is to remove the first half of the title and I would have been perfectly happy with this.